Good. Thanks, everybody. I'm Dan Rundy. I'm the co-director of the U.S. Leadership and Development Project here at CSIS. It's really a pleasure to have Talya Bosch, who's Senior Director of Social Ventures at Western Union, and Neal Keny-Guyer, who's CEO of Mercy Corps, here with us today. I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion about a unique partnership between Mercy Corps and Western Union. And I also think we're going to have a chance to talk about one of the most important forces for good in development, which oftentimes is overlooked when we have conversations about development, which is the power of remittances and the power of diasporas. And so I think what's interesting about this partnership is how it channels and these forces for good and these constructive forces in development. Western Union has an initiative called Our World, Our Family, which is a $50 million initiative around economic opportunity. And its partnership with Mercy Corps is its first partner and its largest partner in that $50 million initiative. And I think we're going to hear a lot about both institutions and how they work together, and also this larger issue, as I said, about remittances and diaspora. So let me start first with, I'm going to ask Neal a couple questions first, and we were having a really interesting discussion earlier about, we were doing podcasts, and you would be surprised how many people actually listen to podcasts. I didn't know about podcasts until I came to CSIS. It shows a little bit how antiquated I am, but basically we'll get something like 5,000 downloads for an interview like that all over the world, because people are very hungry for information about development. I think stories like the ones that you'll hear, I think are very compelling. And I think with Neal, the question I have for you is, could you talk a little bit about the evolution of Mercy Corps as an organization? We were talking a little bit about that maybe 10 or 15 years ago, that perhaps the sorts of big strategic partnerships that you now have with Western Union may not have been on your radar screen, not so much because maybe the development context has changed. If you could just talk a little bit about the evolution of Mercy Corps.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Mercy Corps, like so many of our colleague organizations, was founded around a great humanitarian crisis. And for us, it was the killing fields of Cambodia, 30-something years ago now. And so I think many people still associate the organization with humanitarian response. And in fairness, when I look back 10 years ago, we did not have any major private sector corporate partnerships. We certainly had support from the private sector, from many well-known companies. But what has evolved is, I think, in our own thinking, is that we recognize that wherever we work in the world, we live within an ecosystem of resources and investment. There's official aid, there's funds from local government, there's private sector, there's often sovereign wealth funds, and increasingly we see ourselves as pioneering that last mile of connectivity, connecting the people for whom we exist, often referred to as the bottom billion, really into the full ecosystem, not just into the official aid channel. We all know that private investment and trade flows dwarf aid flows. And we know that in so many places in the world that you can't sustain any gains in health, education, and social welfare if you don't undergird it with economic opportunity. And nothing is sustainable if it's not market-based and ultimately driven in terms of economic opportunity by the private sector. So I think that recognition and the fact that we live in an ecosystem in some of the toughest areas in the world is why we now are working with Western Union, with Google in the Middle East, with Swiss Re to roll out disaster risk insurance from Haiti to the rest of the world, as we can talk about, from Starbucks and tea plantations in India. And these are substantive strategic partnerships, not just philanthropic.
Talk a little bit about, this is really interesting, how we were talking a little bit about how you were talking to, Western Union came to you, in essence, I'll hear from Talya in a minute about how that happened, but I'm sure you only had to think about it for about a nanosecond, and they said, would you like to partner with us? And you said, well, let me think about that for a nanosecond, and that sounds like a great idea. But could you talk a little bit about when they came to you, what you thought the possibilities were, and how that relationships, how it's evolved, and because I think there are a number of examples here that I want to get into, but if you could talk a little bit about what you hoped and what's happened since as the relationships evolved.
Well, we were thrilled to get the call from Western Union, and I'll tell you why. Mercy Corps has been involved in promoting access to financial services for a number of years. We've created a number of microfinance institutions. And we know that the holy grail, in many ways, it's remittances. It's the billions and billions of dollars in remittances that flow back into the developing world and often into some of the toughest places. Just think Haiti, more than $1 billion from North America alone that is flowing into Haiti. Think Somalia right now, more than $100 million is flowing into Somalia, and it's been a great source of comfort and support for the Somali people, particularly during this latest crisis. So to have, the premier company in remittances with 400,000 agent locations or more, but 400,000 plus agent locations, we saw that as an incredible platform that we wanted to see if we could work together to leverage for access to financial services and economic development in the communities where we work.
Great. Let me ask Talya, I want to get to you now. Tell me, we were talking earlier about that Western Union. When my grandparents thought of Western Union, they thought of telegrams, but you guys stopped sending real telegrams in 2006, but you can get singing telegrams if we wanted.
Yep.
But tell us a little bit about the company of Western Union, what you were talking about, what you send and what Western Union means as a company, because I think it reflects how Western Union thinks about development and the business case for development for Western Union.
Yeah, absolutely. And those singing telegrams are online, and it's reflective, I think, of the ways that we've changed as a company. So we are certainly trying to get closer to our consumers in all kinds of ways because we realize that they send so much more than money, right? They send love, they send hope, they send opportunity. They send all of the things that Neal and his colleagues help people provide.
Neal mentioned, is it over 420,000?
It is 485,000 locations.
Okay, so 200 countries?
200 countries and,
And
territories.
I'm trying to remember how many countries there are in the United Nations. I think there's 206.
I think you're around 192. I'm
And
sure
so
someone
are you
here
in
will tell us.
every country in the world?
We're in all but 3, and then we add in some territories.
Okay, so you're in every country in the world. I don't think
Except
there's
3. Except
right, and we can maybe take it. You're in not North Korea.
Correct.
What are the other two you're not in?
Iran and Myanmar.
Okay, all the garden spots. All the garden, okay, so you're in terms of a global reach. I don't think there's anybody with a larger corporate global reach of any American company in the world.
No.
For how many distribution points?
485,000.
485,000 locations.
Physical locations. And then the other thing that we're doing is expanding into prepaid, into mobile money transfer, into the internet, into a whole variety of ways to, in some ways I think it echoes so beautifully what Neal is trying to do. So Neal is the last mile. In many ways we are as well. He talks about the ecosystem, and our vision is to create a ubiquitous financial services infrastructure for people globally at all levels of the economic spectrum. And so I think you're right, that reach is critical, the variety of channels is critical, and that reach to not only urban areas, but really into some very remote places.
$76 billion?
Yes, person-to-person money transfer, and then if you add in small business, it's much larger than that.
You've had 2 CEOs under the Our World, Our Family program. One was born in France.
Yep.
And one was born in Turkey.
Yeah, the Netherlands and Turkey.
Netherlands and Turkey.
Yep.
So could you talk a little bit, you're a very international company. You're an American company with a very international profile, both in terms of your leadership and in terms of your distribution. Does that have any influence as well in terms of your leadership and how they think about the world? Because it seems, when I read their interviews, it's a very internationalist mindset.
It absolutely does. And it's one of the best, I mean, there's so many wonderful things really about working for the company, but it's a lot of fun to be able to go to company conferences, just to hear the languages that are spoken and to see that much like our agents, it's fascinating. Much like our agents, our leadership reflects our customers. And in many cases, our leadership is our customers. Our CEO sends money home. He actually was raised in Austria. He continues to send money home to his father in Turkey. So we know what the customer experience is because our CEO is a customer. And so many of our leaders are migrants themselves.
So, Neal, I was asking you earlier because I want to get into some of the projects that you all have co-created together. I think that was one of the things that I thought interesting about your initiative between the 2 organizations is that you wanted to co-create something. You didn't want to write a check, and you saw this as the business case for development and in line with economic opportunity, because a lot of what your company is about economic opportunity. Okay, so Neal, healthy street food. Can you tell me about why healthy street food, and what's this all about?
This is a great, healthy street food. This is a great story. I'm going to fortunately, this is just after lunch, so I won't make anyone hungry here. And if you look in so many slums around the world, and this is particularly true in Asian slums, and in this case, we're talking about Jakarta, you have high instances of malnutrition and micronutrient deficiency among children. And one of the drivers of that is in the slums, people live so crowded together, they don't have a kitchen. And so many people purchase their food through food carts on the street food. And much of that food is high in fat, high in salt, high in sugar, right? And, we see that in the
Not that
West.
there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, it's not that there's anything wrong with that. And so the typical way to tackle it, and there's still room for typical traditional ways, but as World Food Programming, school feeding programs, and so forth. But what we said, let's see if there's a market-based solution. Let's see if you can create a social enterprise, healthy food carts, through a grant of $150,000 from a private donor. We turned that into equity, found local entrepreneurs, rolled out food carts, had a group of students from MIT Business School come and help develop the business plan. Right? It could be any number of schools. And we had a local group help develop the marketing. So today, there are thousands of people being served all across Jakarta. It's being rolled out to other, major cities in Indonesia, and looking at some pilots elsewhere in Asia. And, it's employing hundreds of entrepreneurs right now who are making their money providing healthy street food. We're actually having an evaluation now to look at the changes in health. But what, the important part of this is that it's market-based, it's now sustainable, and it's a social enterprise that is meeting a tough social challenge. That's where some of our partnerships with Western Union and others come in, by providing that kind of seed funding. We can also talk later, and I want to, about the role of government too, where you get private sector groups like Mercy Corps and the government, when those trilateral kind of partnerships can really make a difference.
So Talya, we were talking earlier in the podcast interview about financial literacy and skill building and risk capital, because it sounds to me as if you want to have a chain of street food vendors or micro franchises, which is another area you all have worked on, there's some basic building blocks that Western Union sees as necessary to be able to achieve that sort of a scale. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about business skills and financial literacy and risk capital, and how that feeds into your thinking?
Absolutely. I would say, first of all, it feeds into both on the individual and on the small business level. So when you think about individuals, whether they're remittance receivers or not, all of us need a fair degree of financial literacy to be able to convert, if we have a job, our wages to wealth, right? So otherwise, anyone, anywhere in the world, too often lives hand to mouth. And so that's something that we see as part of our responsibility, as a corporate citizen, to understand that we want to equip our money senders and receivers with basic skills. And sometimes it's really not that complicated. There are ideas that people in this room may take for granted, but I hear from your team all the time about what an eye-opener it is for Kenyan youth, for example, to think about saving for the future, and the idea that savings can be multiplied, that is not necessarily something that's kind of in the atmosphere. It's not part of the ecosystem that some of your beneficiaries and our customers live with all the time. So that starts at the individual level. One of the things that we've seen is that our customers, and migrants in general, tend to be highly entrepreneurial. So in the United States, there is a disproportionate number of small businesses who are started by migrants, and it makes sense for all kinds of reasons we could talk about. And so we realized as a business that one of the ways we could serve our customers is not only to offer person-to-person solutions and bill payment, but to help them with small business. And so we do that in a number of ways. We've made major acquisitions to be able to provide services to small businesses to help them move money more efficiently, better, without having that FX, the exchange rate shocks that can really be devastating for small business owners. But then also to think about what our other assets could be in conjunction with Mercy Corps, primarily, and others, to be able to help those small businesses thrive. Because the money is a critical piece, but it's not the only piece. And I know I hear this from your team all the time, that if you give someone money and they don't know how to use it, they could end up further behind. You know, that technical assistance, that financial literacy, core business skills really are critical. So we take that quite seriously.
Neal, can you talk a little bit about these business skill development? Because obviously this is something that you all have developed some expertise in. Talk a little bit about business skill development for.
Yeah, I mean, these are the fundamentals. Again, this is what a lot of us take for granted. It's what junior achievement has done in schools all over this country and now, around the world. Everything from how do you balance a checkbook, how do you create a savings account, what does savings look like, what is the potential power of savings, how can you think in terms of a cash flow sense at one level, right? At another level, clearly, if you're helping an entrepreneur to start a business, you're moving up the ladder, the ladder of sophistication, so to speak. But again, it's fundamentals of how do you write a business plan, how do you express that financially in terms of, income and expenses and balance sheets and so forth, and really how do you manage your cash flow, which is often so critical, particularly for startups, and particularly when you move from the startup to the next level. Those are the areas that we focus on, either ourselves or in partnership with others.
Yeah, and if I could say,
Yeah,
one of the things that we've done is to take some of the tools and materials that Neal's team has created, which were great, and to be able to use our massive reach to get those materials into people's hands. So we have toolkits for people who are about to migrate or have recently migrated to say, you may be making more money than you've ever thought possible. Congratulations. And now let's help you think about how that money could be used and the kinds of conversations you want to have with the people that you're sending that money to. And, what are your goals? Those types of things. We've distributed, about 1 million toolkits.
Right, and the power of it is now, I was reaching for my mobile phone, which I took, but the power of it now, particularly as Western Union and others, are moving much more toward mobile remittances. People recognize that power. Well, now, either on an SMS platform or smartphone platform, you can connect this financial literacy tools quickly, easily. You can connect, more sophisticated planning tools, and it's right there. Or every time someone goes into a Western Union agent location, there could be a kiosk, which we've talked about, that for those who are going in to either send money or receive money, they can easily plug into training now. I mean, we're on, as everyone knows, this is so obvious, we're on the brink of a technological revolution, and particularly mobile technology is enabling us to do things today that we only dreamed of 10 and 15 years ago.
Yeah, this is almost a dated example. I mean, I was very impressed a couple of years ago when I was sitting with some of your colleagues, and I'm holding up my ATM card, but they have those funny symbols on the back. Well, Neal's team, in partnership with the Gates Foundation, has created a network of microfinance institutions in Indonesia, an ATM system, so that if you're a microfinance saver, you can access your money with an ATM card. But that, in essence, is being leapfrogged by this. And so there's also, as you're saying, there's a whole set of, you guys are experimenting with this, and obviously Western Union as a company is experimenting with this. And talk a little bit more about technology. What's that meant for this partnership? Has it evolved over the last 5 years?
I think that it's evolving, and so one of the things that we've wrestled with, and I don't think that we're alone, is trying to figure out where is the line between business and social. So I believe we're a mission-driven brand. I think that today we're a shared value company, that our core business benefits society. But truthfully, we've been delivering shared value by default rather than by design. And I think that there was a little bit of reluctance to try to get too close. We didn't want to be seen as doing things for the wrong reason, and frankly, we weren't really sure, other than writing a check. Companies are not necessarily traditionally designed for social impact. And so that's been an evolution, I think, on our end. I'll tell you, I think Mercy Corps is probably a little bit ahead of us in some ways with what you saw as being possible. And I think as we have evolved as a company, we're getting there. So we absolutely see that we have a whole fantastic toolbox, and we can be a little bit more creative about mixing the colors between our core business assets, our social assets, our people, our time, you name it, across the board. And what we see as coming, to Neal's point, is yes, it's the mobile phone, but it's also, what if you mix that mobile phone with a prepaid card and, with a Square device or with the internet? It's not just one single channel, it's how these channels play together that can become very powerful. And so we've started to engage in those conversations with his team, and I think we'll see more of that in the next chapter.
Neal, talk about the role of government. You said you wanted to get to that, and I also want to hear from Talya about your experience in Haiti in particular. But Neal, go at you first, please.
Well, I think some of the most exciting kind of broad trilateral shared value relationships have been where, you have a partnership, let's say with USAID, with a major private company, and with an NGO. I'll give you one example for us was with respect to Walmart down in Guatemala. So with Walmart, they were really eager to have smallholder farmers, some of the poorest farmers in Guatemala, in the highlands, plug into their market chains and be sold locally in their stores in Guatemala, right? We were interested in boosting farmers' productivity and incomes in some of the hardest reached places. U.S. government was interested in reducing poverty in Guatemala. And so what the U.S. government could do is and this isn't big money we're talking about, it kind of lowers the transaction costs and risk, enables us to provide some of the technical assistance to prepare sufficient numbers of farmers, both in numbers and in quality of product, to feed into a market chain. It's the same. It's in a sense, it's a form of insurance. When we think of OPIC or others who really, are providing that backstop insurance that right aligns incentives, right aligns policy frameworks, and that's often critical in places.
Talya, talk about Haiti and the work that you all are doing together in Haiti.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that that's another great example of where this community that's gathered here today, including government, can be critical in creating an enabling environment that inspires new forms of collaboration and new solutions. But we started working together right after the disaster. In fact, there was a period where it was very hard to get money in. And I know it's a great example of this partnership where we have that trusted relationship. Mercy Corps was able to call and say, can you help us get the cash we need on the ground? And we did. And so right from the start, we were working together. Part of what we love is that market-based solution to problems such as those that we see in Haiti. I'll let you talk a little bit more, for example, about what you're doing with water delivery and other things from a market solutions approach. But then what we heard from our people on the ground, our agent network, and also your team, was that we needed to go outside Port-au-Prince and really look at other communities, the Central Plateau, to prevent that influx back into an already destabilized area. And that one of the best ways to do that was to create livelihoods that would keep people grounded and would help them meet their own needs on the ground. And so we've been working very closely over the past several years to help small businesses, to start up and thrive. So in some cases to restart existing businesses, and in other cases to, to borrow your phrase, to turn crisis into opportunity by letting people have something more than what they had in the past.
Yeah, no, we were extremely grateful to have, a partner like Western Union who early on, really believed that the quicker you can restore local markets, the quicker is the recovery and the higher quality. It's just as we've learned, the more you can get vouchers into the hands of those impacted so they can buy locally and they can make the decisions for themselves and not just depend upon a big aid apparatus, the better it is. It promotes dignity of the individual, it empowers them, and it sets the stage for more rapid recovery later on. And so to have a partner who said, okay, early on, we know it's important to invest in restoring businesses in terms of meeting the needs of people for clean water. We said, it's going to take all solutions here, but one solution surely is to work with local vendors, right? So they can set up water delivery networks and give vouchers to people impacted. And as it turned out, that system, at least in the early days, proved more reliable than the public systems, but it's using market incentives and market-based solutions.
If I could say that one of the things that we can then bring to the table, given the uniqueness of who we are, is then to engage diaspora communities who already care so much, who already are so incredibly generous, to offer other types of support. So we've communicated that work back to many of our constituents. We did during the cholera epidemic, so we looked at that as another way to help raise health awareness, was to communicate among diaspora communities who we knew would communicate back home. And then Mercy Corps has a micro-mentor program that we've been very proud to be part of that helps small businesses with, again, that technical assistance as well as capital. We support both. But one of the things that they do is connect people who have succeeded, who have business know-how, with people who are just getting started. And so they create that stronger social fabric, which is really what we're about as well through our core business. But what we can do is reach into the diaspora community to encourage people to become mentors, and we did. We together created all kinds of advertising, flyers for grassroots marketing. We did receipt messages. We did free, radio ads, so we can use our voice. I think we're among the best ethnic marketers in the world to try to think about how we create a stronger network, global network for development.
Yeah, I mean, you have this program, Micro Mentors, which is this is linking Haitians in New York with Haitians in Haiti, to just sort of one example. So we talk in the development business about how do we link diaspora communities and expertise. Here's an example of actually doing this.
Yep.
But I'd be curious about that. But I'd also be curious about how you catalyze diaspora money donations to the extent have you experimented with that as well?
Yeah, we have experimented with it. I'll tell you that it's very tough, particularly to do as a one-off. So one of the things that we're thinking about is how can we build that capacity on an ongoing basis. So we did try to raise awareness and to ask for money. We had a consumer match, a one-for-one match. So if you gave to Mercy Corps, we would, whoever you were, for Haiti, we would match it dollar for dollar, up to $500,000 for $1 million total. And I would tell you that it was tough. Fundraising is a tough business. I don't envy you that. But so we had some success. It was, it wasn't everything that we would have liked to see, but I think it was promising. The other thing that we did in terms of fundraising was working with their team to tell the story. So how could we amplify the things that Neal's team is already doing? So it's a start.
Neal, talk about this Micro Mentor program and how that works on a mechanically. How does that happen?
Well, just think matchmaker.com and apply it to micro entrepreneurs. That's essentially what it is.
I think it's match.com. We both must be both out of the market, so we don't know about
or match.com,
right?
But it is really taking that kind of, social networking technology and linking, people who have the desire to bring the skills to be the mentors with entrepreneurs who are looking for that. So this is a program we run in the U.S. Through a local affiliate of ours that we took over from the Aspen Institute, interestingly enough, who hatched it. And then we've extended that in a couple places in Asia and now in Haiti with Western Union support and help. So it was a way to engage the diaspora. It was a way to get concrete help to local entrepreneurs, and it's also a way that these local entrepreneurs can connect with one another and share information on markets, on product quality, and so forth. So, but it's using technology to lower the support costs and to increase engagement, civic engagement.
Talya, I'm thinking of something outside of your relationship with Mercy Corps around diasporas, African diasporas. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work you've done here in Washington around African diasporas? I suspect there may be some folks in the room that are familiar with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that I was thinking about that towards the end of my last comment. So one of the things that diasporas bring, it's not just money, although of course it's always critical, but they bring insight and caring. They understand what some of the development challenges are, perhaps better than anyone else, because very often those challenges, those barriers, are the reasons that people left. That so much migration is economically driven. So what we've done with the African Diaspora Marketplace in conjunction with USAID, another great example of working with government for solutions.
Who's your partner with that these days? Is it FHI 360?
We are still working that through.
Okay, you're still working that through. Okay.
Yep. And so what we've been able to do is to continue that program, and it engages business people in the United States who have know-how and want to start businesses or expand existing businesses back in Africa. It's about 14 different countries.
Yeah.
And so we've done roadshows, which are business workshops, so that help people, whether or not they apply for this program, to actually get skilled up in the United States.
Yeah.
They apply. There's an independent panel of judges. We bring the leaders together. The last time we did it was about 54
Yeah, I was there. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like a small business fair, kind of like a science fair for small business. We did that here in Washington, D.C. That was really valuable for people as well in terms of making connections and practicing, their speeches, their pitches for their business. And we heard from a lot of people that was, even if they didn't win the money, was incredibly valuable. But then we did give up to $100,000 to 14 businesses who were our winners. And it's really fascinating things. They've started businesses in Africa. One of my favorites is a ferry. It's the first passenger ferry on Lake Victoria since, I think, 1995. It's dramatically cutting transportation time. It's run on locally sourced biodiesel, so employing local sunflower seed owners. And so just the impact is incredible. We also helped a company that checks for fake drugs. So, you can use your cell phone and ping, you scratch off the back of a drug, you've probably seen this, but you can test whether or not that drug is safe to use, because that's a major health issue.
Yep.
And so that's another example of ways that we can create connections and hopefully drive a great social impact.
Let me shift gears one last time, then we'll open it up.
Okay.
You all have designed this partnership around sustainable economic opportunity. You've needed to be flexible because you're in dozens of countries, built around basic learning skills, financial literacy, business skill, other broader business skills, some seed capital, and then the cross-cutting issue of how do you respond to emergencies. So I understand what you've built together and co-created there. How do you work together? Could you talk a little bit about, did you guys sign an MOU? Did you say, this is how is it consensus based? How do you manage disagreements or differences of opinion or differences of vision?
Please.
I think it's just been wonderful. So we did in the early days sign an MOU, and it is a real partnership, where there is transparency, where it's largely consensus driven, where we want to hear from the teams, from your people about what's needed. Obviously, we want to share our priorities. We've brought their team in to hear our business strategy. So we've had their team meet with our senior corporate business strategists and made all of our thinking clear to say, here's what we're doing as a company. What is it that we could potentially do together? And I think that we've done a lot of really wonderful things. I think it creates an opportunity to innovate. As I said, in some ways I think we're just getting started, but we know each other and we invite each other to events. If I ever can invite a guest, Mercy Corps is the first group that I think of. If there's news or that we're hearing from around the world, I'll call up the team and say, hey, are you hearing this too? Is this something you're responding to? Is it something you're concerned about? So we share information and we share connections as much as anything else. So I would say in that way, it's so far beyond writing a check. I chat with your team a lot. Jennifer is fantastic when she's thinking about new cause marketing opportunities. I have a background in cause marketing, and so I'm happy to chat with Jennifer all the time about what could be done and how to approach other corporations on Mercy Corps' behalf.
Yeah, I just would, what I would echo on our side is that, like so many things in life, it really boils down to relationships, doesn't it? And to take the time to build those relationships, be honest about expectations, never make it exclusive, right? I think, just the conversation with Western Union, frankly, has given us some ideas to go to other corporate partners with, which Western Union celebrates, just as the conversations
Absolutely.
they've had with us have enabled them to identify other NGO partners who might be more appropriate for what they want. And that's great. That's the synergy. That's fantastic. But I think but what's fundamental is, and I do, sometimes we create these terms that are kind of rhetorical, but the shared value. I do think moving from corporate social responsibility to a concept of shared value is opening up possibilities for partnership in the last couple of years that didn't exist. And I think we both see that power. We see the potential. It's tough, it's hard, but we know it's there. And so we both embrace that.
Thanks, folks. So we're going to open up to the audience, but thanks. That was really great. Okay, so I'm going to call on folks. Looking for friends and family here. Okay, I'm going to hear from my colleague from CSIS. You've got the floor.
Thanks so much. So many questions. This sounds like a wonderful opportunity. And you addressed it just briefly to voila. We need to kind of go on automatically when you start talking. In any case, do you see a change in the atmosphere recently? Because you think of NGOs as having a bit of a suspicion of corporate entities. And is that an evolution that's more of a trend now? Or did you have to work a little bit to build the trust between yourselves and also between other corporations that you might go to? And also, I'm just thinking, I think the financial literacy bit is so interesting, because when I was at USTDA, we did a project with Mexico, and of course in the US, the remittances are so large. But one of the key elements was this kind of off-market transfer of the remittances, and you're in a perfect situation to address that. You know, you have these little kind of storefront people who take the money and ship it and to another storefront in Mexico, and you're kind of off the grid where somebody actually has an account and there's less of a transaction cost. So can you address a little bit about how you approach that kind of in the middle between financial literacy and actually investing the money once you build?
So Neal, perhaps you could talk a little bit about the mind shift about NGOs, and then Talya, if you could talk about the second question.
Yeah, I think there's been an evolution, certainly over the last 20 or 30 years, where there's been a move on the part of most NGOs, not all, but most, to see the possibilities of partnership with the private sector to embrace market-based solutions, particularly if you're a practitioner like we are, if you're out, on the front lines trying to bring about development. You're not going to ever get scale if you don't have private sector partnerships. At the same time, I would say, as part of our mission, there will always be a part that says, at one level we exist to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable, right? But I think the best private sector partners would embrace that mission as well. I would say, though, I think that this concept of shared value, again, we're all so excited about, because, it was great to sort of get the philanthropical support. It was great to even, have these corporate social responsibility partnerships. But when you think of where the real richness is for partnership, if we can tie in to the core mission of a company and leverage their market chains for good, and if a company can tie into, we talk about those last mile connections, or as one of my colleagues says, the first mile connections, and work out business models that really can connect poor people into these markets, then that represents, a level of impact and scale that's not possible otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And what I'll say in this case is that before we announced our partnership, we probably spent a good year talking to each other. And sometimes it was several times a day. I mean, I knew his team before we had announced anything. I knew his team by voice when I picked up the phone, and it was really that level of depth to say, what do we want to do together, and is this right? And
so you didn't just have a dinner and a movie before you did
No.
this.
Yeah, so I think that there was some tire kicking on both ends, and it's part of what's made it such a resilient partnership. I think you're absolutely right about that shared value, and I'd actually like to give an example and then segue into that question, because I think it could sound a little bit amorphous. So one of the things that we did was to say, okay, we develop products in the way most businesses do. But what if we were to flip that equation? What if we were to start with a social need rather than a business problem? Or rather than starting with our target demographic from our marketing team, what if we were to start with, well, what are the needs of the world? So we started with the MDGs, and we went through the list. We went through, which ones are we best able to address for a variety of criteria? Through our core business. Again, I'm not talking about philanthropy. I'm talking about product. And so this was in partnership with BSR. And we said, it's really up to you. We're not going into this with any preconceived ideas or script for the day, which was really a bold move, because companies don't usually do that. Even if have a stakeholder engagement event, you kind of have a script. We didn't. We said what we want to do is bring about 10 external experts in education together with 10 of our senior people, VPs, SVPs, to listen first to say, what are the unmet needs in education? What are the gaps? Why haven't we solved this problem? And then to spend the afternoon, and this was really the agenda, talking about, okay, if you had access to all of our assets, primarily our business assets, but everything's on the table, what would you do to solve the problem? And this group came up with such wonderful ideas. And Mercy Corps was one of that small handful who were there to tell us what the needs were and what we should be doing. We said, okay, what can we do? And we're working on it now. So,
Talk about the financial literacy question.
yeah, so I think part of your question was, if I'm getting it right, was how do we think about ourselves relative to off-market money transfer opportunities?
Or do you work with banks? You know, do you work with banks to kind of bring them into the real financial market?
Yeah, we absolutely do. We absolutely do. A number of our agents around the world are banks. I don't know how many are banks specifically, but I can tell you banks and post offices are about 70% of our agents globally. A lot of supermarkets, certainly in the United States and elsewhere, and then a whole lot of small businesses, which is another way that we try to have impact, is by making it possible for mom and pop stores to offer Western Union services, right? It's another revenue stream. It drives foot traffic. We see that as a social good. So we do work with banks, and they're not necessarily competitors. Again, when we think about, and I'm weighing how much I can talk about in terms of where we are and where we're going, but I do think that there's undoubtedly thinking at our senior-most levels about what else could ride our rails. We have an incredible channel. So what else could we do through marketing or through our core business to get information out to people, but then also to offer a whole suite of services that might meet their needs, in a variety of ways, in whatever types of partnerships. I think we're very open to creative thinking.
Okay, other questions? Yep. Yes, please. Thank you.
I'm Nancy Berg. I wanted to ask about commitment to sustainability, all these wonderful programs, and I wonder what you all have agreed in terms of sustainability and the way the funding works. I gather that there's been the matching funding you've done and other corporate funding. It sounds like you've been extremely generous. And I'm wondering, what other kinds of inputs there are, and how you think about sustainability of the programs, or do they graduate at some point to being self-sufficient as I suppose as the economies grow and whatever happens?
I would say from our perspective, and I'd be curious to hear yours, we absolutely do want programs to become self-sufficient. We have stepped away from some programs that were wonderful. In fact, when you talk about some of the pharmacies in Guatemala, that is a fantastic model, and we did support it. Ultimately, what we realized is that we don't know a whole lot about health. And so while that was supporting small and medium enterprises, it really just wasn't a place where we could bring expertise or add additional value beyond the check. And so we always want to look for where we can add that additional value if we can. And so we stepped down that funding over time. We've tried to do it in a very ethical and responsible way, to ask his team, well, what do you need, and what's a transition going to look like? And we wrestle with that today around, well, what is the future for us in 200 countries and territories? It's tricky. There really isn't a partner that's necessarily going to be able to be every place that we want to be. And that's one of the things that we absolutely wrestle with. And so we are struggling with, well, what could we do? And we have some ideas that I don't think we're quite ready to announce, but what could we do to drive innovation and to balance that idea of sustainability and depth with breadth? That's a common depth, breadth question. I don't know if you have more to add.
Neal, I'm assuming some of it's around additional corporate partners, but also the way in which you're approaching solving problems, in the sense of setting up for-profit businesses that are able to stand up on their own 2 feet. And I hope you can speak to both of those.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, so we have embarked, as our organizations, Mercy Corps, but other of our colleague agencies have as well, creating social enterprises that maybe they're earning slightly sub what we think of as market returns, right? But they're earning sufficient returns to carry on in their marketplace and according to the goals that they've set for themselves, as a way to provide a service, as a way to provide clean water, provide financial services, do environmental sanitation in urban slums, but again, with market-based solutions. So when we think about it, of course, we're always going to hope with Western Union or others, if a big crisis erupts somewhere in the world, we're going to be a partner of choice based on our competence and on our presence, right? And then we're also, but we're also going to be pushing. So, we ask the same thing as Western Union. We ask, 485,000 agent networks, one of the premier remittance, organization in the world. How can that be leveraged to provide greater financial access for people who don't have it now? And if in the course of that we can suggest a service that makes Western Union maybe more competitive in the process for what they, great, because that's a sustainable way. So we're not looking in that sense for an ongoing sort of, an ongoing contribution to set up our costs. And I think in the same way, Western Union now will pay for, as other companies will, a group like Mercy Corps maybe analyzing a remittance corridor between one part of the world and the other, and just coming forward with some ideas about how to enhance and improve the delivery along that corridor in a way that can support local development. In the same way, a Unilever will talk with us about smallholder farmers all over Africa about, how can those farmers be better organized to plug in to our market chains, right? And people are willing to both pay for that as a service and then look at really alternative business models that can sustain that.
Sir.
First, kind of a baseline question so I can get to the main question, and that is, what is the technology base for Western Union across the world? Do they all have like a PC and a web-based program? Which leads me to the other question. Could you expand on the use of the technology, and particularly apps for cell phones or something like that?
Yeah. So that is absolutely something we're looking at. We do have an app in the United States. You can download it today with very little marketing because it was just a pilot. And it's huge. I heard the numbers the other day, and I'll try to get them for you, but it was staggering how many downloads we had. I mean, it was something like 1,000 a day. It was just unbelievable, again, with very little promotion. And so it tells us that there's certainly a desire there. Now, we know that that's just the start. One of the things that we try to do, and I think like most financial services firms, there are ways in which we're fairly conservative because we want to guarantee that your money, will get there. We want reliability is critical to our brand. So we never want to jeopardize that as we experiment with, new apps or, what else could ride along with that financial capability. On the other hand, we're very innovative and in many ways are kind of a very old startup. We're 160 years old, but we have a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in our DNA. And so you're right, we're looking at that, and we certainly have talked to the Mercy Corps team about that. But first we want to make sure that we're doing what we need to do for our customers with their money. And then I think that there's lots of room to grow to think about what else could wrap around that.
Bob?
Have you tried things of trying to get pooled money for some of these projects by people participating over the internet or over their cell phones and getting together the money to do something?
It's a collective use of resources.
I'd say the time that we've tried it in our relationship, and I believe that Mercy Corps has done a lot more with others and have just done a fantastic job. We did try that with our diaspora communities for Haiti. As I said, I think that it was a mixed result. We've probably raised about $215,000, I think, the last time we saw it. A lot of that was thanks to the hard work of Neal's fundraising team and being able to leverage our commitment in very creative ways. So I think that there's probably room to grow there. I think part of the challenge is when you're thinking about a very global customer base, people want to know where their money is going. And so something like breast cancer, is may be very clear. And I think for Mercy Corps, because what they do is so complex and what we do together, if you don't necessarily feel passionate about Indonesia or Kenya or Haiti, one of the places that we're supporting, that becomes a harder sell. And I don't know that we've fully figured that out. If anyone has brilliant ideas, I'm all ears. But yes, clearly one of the things that we understand that there could be tremendous impact if people were able to multiply the impact or to give to a cause, right, through Western Union. And so that's something that we've thought about. We do make free money transfer available in times of disaster very often. We have a standing relationship where if you want to give to Mercy Corps through Western Union, you can do it for free. We charge nothing. So there are those things that we do to help enable contributions, but I can't say that we've fully cracked that code yet.
Neal, I'm hoping you could speak to this issue of collective contributions and how does that, you must come across, whether it's with the Western Union relationship or more broadly, how you deal with that issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the innovations in the last few years that Mercy Corps actually was one of the first to create. Now others do it, which is great. But, made it very easy for a place like CSIS or the workplace or the school or so forth, through using social networking technology to be able to create the kind of circles or the kind of, local organizations themselves that could give for a cause. This, when the need is clear, this really works, like around Japan or around Haiti or even around the Horn of Africa. One of the other interesting things, we have a partnership right now with Time Warner, Warner Studios for the Horn of Africa. And I give them a lot of credit because it's not like a lot of people are sitting around thinking about the Horn of Africa, whereas, Haiti sort of gripped everyone. But so Time Warner, Warner Studios, Empire Entertainment, they are creating links again to schools and other places, but around film action heroes. So these, Superman and Batman, these action heroes against hunger. And so every movie that will be shown that's put out by Warner Studios will have a trailer talking about action heroes against hunger. And all of those resources will go to support hunger relief in the Horn of Africa. And they pledged up front $2 million. And we did it as a consortium with two other great NGOs, the IRC and Save the Children. So we're really excited about that partnership, particularly for the Horn of Africa, which has been so hard to bring attention to.
George.
Neal and Talya, to make a point and to get your attention, when are your organizations going to merge? You use the same language. You sound like you both went to the same school and work for the same organization. You're both talking about market solutions to social problems. And so how close are we to these disparate fields merging together? How far are we from Mercy Corps being able to finance all of its activities through market activities rather than contributions? Western Union probably is already going to its stockholders and say our future rests with finding solutions to people's social, personal problems. And maybe there's a further step that you're going to be saying, we really have to start, if we want to stay sustainable, we have to reduce our take. How close are we? Are these areas merging now?
Yeah, it is. It actually is very interesting listening to both of you, and there's a consonance of language that I think is very interesting. So yeah, perhaps you could comment on that.
Well, I think we're much closer to having the kind of partnerships that yield real impact at scale, because a lot of it has been storytelling. In these partnerships, and you haven't seen many that go to scale. But where I would step back a little bit is what I think is happening among many of the larger international NGOs. You're either moving toward advocacy and campaigning as your fundamental core mission, and that's great because we need that, or you're moving much more toward really being great at producing innovation and social innovation. Because even in our biggest programs where we provide services, in our case, you take in Afghanistan, where at one point we had 1,000 staff, and an annual budget of $40 million. But in the greater scheme of Afghanistan, in the greater scheme of what's being spent, it's a speck, right? It's hardly going to be transformational. What's going to be transformational is when we create the kind of social innovations like the bank in Indonesia, like a disaster risk facility that came out of Haiti, like some of the partnership that can leverage 400-something thousand agent locations and all these remittances. And we are, in a sense, to me, that our purpose is being those social innovators. And that's what I think you're seeing a lot of the international NGOs moving toward, because with the flattening of our world, you don't need us to deliver that many services anymore, but you still need that knowledge of local communities, that last mile, first mile access, with a mentality that you can innovate alternative business models that I think provide lasting and more meaningful solutions to these tough social problems. That's what's going to bring us together.
talk about this consonance of language?
Yeah, no, it's part of why Mercy Corps is our partner, right? It's not a coincidence, right? You know, it's a reason that we've been able to work so well together. You know, we are a for-profit business. You know, that is very clear. So our CEO is very clear about that, and he is our champion for this. I give him a lot of credit.
great.
He really is, and he lives and breathes share value in his bones. You know, so there's a lot that we can do with Mercy Corps out of our foundation, and we'll continue to do that. Some of what we've been hearing is a little bit more on the shared value end of things. So what do we do in terms of our products or in terms of cause marketing? All of those assets are assets that we can use. And ideally, if we get it right, we'll directly profit the company by creating new products that change lives while also driving revenue. And so for us, that's the holy grail. Now, that requires that we think differently about how we work with groups like Mercy Corps. So it's not just writing checks anymore. And when I talk about creating an enabling environment, that's part of the challenge, because the current system is set up for me to write a check and you to go do the work. And it's harder for us to collaborate because we take very seriously our responsibility to the IRS around self-dealing and other regulations. And so we have to get creative about, okay, well, you know, who can talk to whom about what? And it would be a lot better if if we could all get in a room and really bring all of those assets to bear more seamlessly, as long as we're very clear about what our intentions are, right? So when we're talking about a purely social, philanthropic initiative, and when we're talking about Mercy Corps working with us to drive social impact through some of our other channels.
What I just one more to finish up. But what I think you're going to see, certainly, you know, I hope in Mercy Corps' case, you know, we are already deriving value from all the microfinance institutions that we've set up. Some that have gone commercial or gone public, we've benefited as being early, you know, stockholders, shareholders in that. We plow that back into mission. It supports our ongoing economic development. But we see that more and more in the future. We have a concept now, I can't say more about it, but of a, you know, really it's a partnership potentially with a major technology company, with a couple of other international NGOs, with a major university around producing social innovation. We're all agreed to set it up as a for-profit. All agreed to set it up. And in that case, we'll be taking reserves as equity, you know, or members of our social innovation team who will be part of that. But its mission will be around social, in this case, particularly leveraging mobile technology, you know, for development. That will be its mission per se. And everyone's agreed that those kind of incentives are really important to yield the results that we want.
Let me take advantage of to ask both of you the issue of, okay, we're in Washington, you have the World Bank down the street, you have IFC, you have OPIC, you have AID. There's certainly, we touched briefly on, we have hardly touched on the role of government or donor agencies in this conversation. We've touched on it just briefly. Could you each just talk to, okay, what you'd like to see, not what you're doing, but what you'd like to see donor agencies or ODA providers or sort of the traditional architecture of aid, what would you like to see from them as partners in could either helping to take this to scale or certain sorts of flexible resources, or what would you both like to see? That would be, I think that would be useful given that we're in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's a couple areas in particular, and I'm looking back, you have in Bill Garvelink, one of, you know, the real smart, innovative people in terms of humanitarian assistance, recovery, and laying foundations for long-term development. But for us, it really is, I mean, I'll just speak, and I know you guys are pretty, you know, private sector friendly, but this kind of culture of compliance that has crept in to most relationships with government now runs the risk of squeezing out this kind of innovation that we all need. At the end of the day, you know, it's going to be around innovation that takes us forward. And so we would like a real partner there. I think some of the things that Ross Shaw has done with his Office of Social Innovation. So that's one, is more flexibility, more a spirit of partnership, less a culture of compliance. And I know a lot of that's driven from Congress, not from inside the administration. So that's one. And number two is, I think there is a way that government, both through policy frameworks and through kind of a, an ultimate insurer, can just lower some upfront risk that create more incentives for NGOs, Western unions, and others to come together. And, and there are ways we have talked about to do that. So it's more flexibility, support for innovation, and lower some of the transactional costs and risk, particularly in places like Somalia or Haiti or northern Uganda, where the influence of government is so very important.
I would echo that. I absolutely agree around the enabling environment. I certainly would say for us, always speed to market is critical. So, if there were a kind of a fast track channel within some of the agencies where it was easier to bring folks together but also get something into the field, for that rapid innovation, I think that that would be helpful. The other thing that I'll say is I want them as my customers. I think that there's a role that we can play in channeling money, let's say, from any of those organizations through to, let's say, a central bank, then to the education department, all the way down to paying a teacher. We can track that and deliver unprecedented transparency, unprecedented accountability. We could even put that up on a website and let people, particularly in areas where there's good household survey data, compare what the results are of how much money reaches whom, let's say, for education in county A versus county B, or and what are the outcomes in terms of education. So I want them to be my customers because I think what we can deliver, it will be much more efficient, much more cost effective, but ultimately I truly believe that we can solve a lot of the accountability and transparency issues faced by those organizations.
Okay, this one will have the last question, then I'm going to leave a little bit of time for folks to come up and have bilateral chats with our speaker, because I suspect if folks stick around, it's generally always a good sign that they want to just have a bilateral word with the folks. So you'll have the last question.
Okay, I'll try to wrap up.
Right. Make it deep and thoughtful.
Okay.
Right. No pressure.
My name is Deb Ashner, and I work with two groups of individuals that we both serve or want to be working with at this point in time. Their problem is that they're either very small NGOs that have offices in the United States that implement programs, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, in very isolated and underserved areas that are very risky programs, but they're very passionate and are able to deliver, but they don't necessarily have the technical know-how to deliver gobs and gobs of data. And then the other group of individuals I work with, people from Benin, Senegal, Ghana, Haiti, Togo, and Burkina Faso, that are part of the African diaspora that want to be able to access certain programs, but they also are very risky in how they're going to deliver them, and they don't have the technical know-how. So how can they either become a subcontractor or sign an MOU with Mercy, or how can they work directly, Talya, with you?
Okay. So Neal, why don't you take that?
I mean, did I
Uh-oh.
lose my?
You may
It was time
lost
to
your.
No, here I go. Okay,
Time-
there
we're
we go.
timing.
Yes. In our case, if they have a presence on the ground where we have, where we have a country presence, the best, because we're, even though we're a large organization, we're highly decentralized. And we put a lot of authority and responsibility in the field, with our country programs. So we should just connect, and where there's an overlap, we should make sure the folks in the field connect with the folks in the field. That, in our case, that often works best. What I would also suggest, if they're, kind of a smaller non-governmental organization here, there is a pathway to join Interaction, which is kind of the trade association for all the, but I think there are some programs there that one could plug into to help build the capacity of an organization around grant management, data management, learning, metrics, those things.
They might
Ja-
just go into the program is that they could never join an organization such as Interaction or Choosing a Child. Or maybe they can join SID, but that's where they're bugged.
Talya, maybe you could talk a little bit about diaspora communities and how you may be working with them, and just maybe either through the work that we've been talking about or else otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. So Well, we've already talked a little bit about the ADM. I will say first, just to in answer to that question, and then I'll come back to the diaspora piece. We're also similarly very decentralized, and so we do a lot of grant matching with our business partners, our agents around the world, because it's very hard to sit in Denver and know what really is having an impact on the ground, anywhere around the world. So we rely on them as our eyes and ears in all of those locations that we've talked about. And so, in some cases, I would say going through headquarters, may not be the best solution, but I do think that Neal's pointed you in the direction of a lot of potentially very good resources.
Well, look, I think we'll wrap it up here. I want you to join me in thanking our panelists.
Did you come here on, let's say, on